Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This is the last episode of our layoff series. Actually, technically, our layoff series is over. But this episode kind of just like wraps everything up. And actually, if you've been here a while, and I mean a while, you might remember when I talked a little bit about this. So what I'm going to be talking about today, and actually with the help of someone that I went to college with actually who has been experiencing this, is ghosting, and specifically ghosting in the interview and recruitment process. And actually, I spoke about this, I think it was 2021. It was episode 42. I had to dig up the archives. I talked about ghosting and how it's really not cool. And my friend, who you'll hear from in a moment, shared some voice messages, I should say, around her experience. So Hannah, thank you so much for sharing your story. Nothing personal will be shared. No details around like specific jobs or anything are going to be shared, but you'll hear from Hannah in a moment through these recordings. And I'm sure that many of you, hopefully not, but many of you either have been affected by people who ghost during the interview process or have ghosted you during the interview process, or maybe you know someone who has been ghosted. Hopefully you are not the ghoster. Of course, before getting into this, I should preface by saying, interview processes, of course, like they can be lengthy. There are a lot of applicants. A lot of people are searching for jobs right now, but that does not mean that ghosting is okay. In fact, I don't know that there's ever a time when ghosting is okay, unless maybe there's like an extreme where the person is, I don't know, harassing you or something. But if you are on the recruiting side of the table, just reply to someone, just let them know that they're no longer in consideration or in the running for that role, or just say, hey, we actually don't have an answer right now, but we'll get back to you when we can. I was really shocked to hear some of the anecdotes that you're about to hear from Hannah. So without further ado, I'm going to play these audio messages. And, hopefully this will allow us to learn from Hannah's experience and also reflect either on our own personal experiences or reflect and learn from the ways in which we should treat people in the interview process. So here we go.
Hi, Traci. So this is a voice note just to share about my experience job searching this time around. So I've been ghosted about 3 or 4 times now, and it is absolutely torturous. My ghostings have generally been either after the first interview or after the final interview. So I'll tell you a little bit about these experiences so you can share with your listeners. And we need to bring the human back to recruiting, frankly. It's been pretty dehumanizing to go through this recruiting process. So I was laid off in August of this year. I was in a non-working notice period since June, and then was formally laid off in August. And I've been in the workforce for about 9 years and have spent most of my time in human resources, learning and development, coaching, program management. And my last job was in talent management and program management, doing a little bit of L&D. And I do have a master's degree and a great deal of experience with public speaking and running training programs. I've been generally looking for similar type of work in talent management, program management, and even HR business partner work. And I don't know the exact number, but I've definitely applied for over 50 jobs. And there have been a few that have ghosted me, which have really surprised me. So the first one, I'm not going to name any employer names, but one of them is a national organization on the stock market with over 30,000 employees nationwide. I had applied to a talent management role with them, and they had filled the role I applied for, but invited me to apply to a different but related role. I went through the screening process. I met the hiring manager. I met some peers. I met other folks in the team. I actually went in person once for my interviewing process. I met 4 people in person. I met at least 4 people over Zoom. I probably went through interviews with about 10 or 11 people total. And I never heard back from them. I followed up for weeks. After moving the recruiting process pretty quickly, they just completely stopped emailing me and stopped answering my email requests for updates. Very surprised because I was invited to apply for this role, and the recruiter had been in her role for over 8 years doing recruiting. Unbelievable. I finally, after about 4 weeks of following up, got an email that they had gone with another candidate. Second process was with a local to Boston organization, but a nationally recognized brand. Interviewed with the recruiter. I interviewed with the hiring manager the next day. I had a panel interview the following week. Everything moved really quickly. I was getting regular emails from the recruiter, thanking me for my time, letting me know that there would be updates. She was putting smiley faces in her emails. We were very friendly. I had the feeling that everything was going really well with that, and I've heard absolutely nothing. The last email I got from the recruiter was almost 3 weeks ago, and it was you'll get an update next week with a smiley face. And she sent me 2 of those that week. Then I interviewed with a world-renowned higher ed institution in Boston, and they actually headhunted me for a role. And I went on campus twice. I met the whole team. I met the executive director of a program. I met so many peers, again, probably interviewed with 8 to 10 people. And I sent a really nice follow-up email. She wrote back, said, you'll hear from us next week with an update, be sort of left hanging for a few weeks, and then told no thanks. So I started to look for contract work just to really fill in this gap. I'm afraid to have a resume gap of more than 6 or 7 months. I'm afraid of what recruiters will think if I start job searching again for full-time work in January, February, with just this really long gap. If you have any follow-up questions, I am happy to share. I also give you all of my permission to share my name and my voice on your podcast. So if you need anything else, let me know. Thank you for bringing attention to this issue with your audience, and I hope that your listeners get something out of this updated episode.
All right, everyone, that was Hannah. Hannah, thank you so much. It's really hard to be vulnerable and to share, experiences that are like this, where, as you put it, I don't exactly know what will be added or trimmed during the editing process, but I'm going to recap what you've said. I took notes, but you shared that you have almost 10 years of working experience and a plethora of experiences on your resume, and a really vast background for all of these jobs that you applied for, and that you're pretty surprised that you haven't really heard back and haven't gotten the communication that you deserve. And it is really surprising. I don't know if the video of my reactions will be in the editing of this episode, but I was rolling my eyes and expressing shock, because hearing some of what you've experienced is so blatantly disrespectful and so out of control. I wish that I had a good answer for you as to why something like that could happen, but I don't think there's a good answer, especially I have the luxury of knowing you personally, and I know that you do not deserve to be ghosted, and you're not, some crazy applicant that isn't going to do an amazing job. So I really don't understand why you've been experiencing this, but I do, just before getting into the recap of things, I do think, there are listeners out there who are going to hear your sentiments, hear your anecdotes and your experience, and they're going to really appreciate it. And so I appreciate your vulnerability and your openness to sharing, and I'm sure that many of the listeners do as well. So just to recap what Hannah shared, of course, she shared her background and that she's applied for over 50 jobs in the HR, L&D, coaching, talent management, HRBP, program management space. And obviously that allows for like a lot of reach, right? With her background and her experience, that allows her to be, not super tied to one specific focus, which is great. That should help in securing more interviews, more opportunities, which, of course, as we heard from Hannah, she had a number of interviews. This is not a situation where it sounds like, the resume needs a ton of work because you're not getting interviews. I mean, she's getting those first interviews, which sometimes are the hardest ones to get, because your resume has to have the relevant information. It has to be readable. It has to, go through all of those things that I talked about in a recent episode about the do's and don'ts of resumes. And it's a little shocking to me that she's gone through all of these interviews. And it's like toward the end of the interview process that she's not hearing back. That is like totally asinine. But anyway, let's recap. So Hannah shared with us 3 to 4 examples here. The first is that, she met the team in person, around 10 or 11 people that she actually met through the interview process, which is a lot. A lot of the times that I was like rolling my eyes in this listening back to the voice notes is just the absolute like shock that these processes are so long and that there's so much time that Hannah has dedicated to a job and an application process, or interview process, I should say, where then she doesn't even get the satisfaction of a reply. It's not even satisfaction, but the decency. It's human decency, as she just texted me last night. And I totally agree. And so she was in the final process for that role. And then after following up because she was ghosted, she finally got an email back after 4 weeks. That is totally unacceptable. Like, I could maybe reason 2 weeks, maybe. But 4 weeks, that's out of control. Like, the reason why I say 2 weeks is because maybe someone's on vacation. Maybe someone, has something come up. Maybe there's like an issue on the team. Maybe there's a reorg internally that slows processes down. But 4 weeks, I've never heard of that happening. The second example that Hannah shared with us is that she was actually referred to the position. So Hannah, before I even forget, have you or can you ask the person who referred you to follow up with these bozos? No offense, but they're bozos at this point to me if they're not even responding to you. Because I think in this example, you said that they didn't even respond. So anyway, before I go, I'm going to table that for 1 second. Let's leave the bozo part for the end here. But Hannah said that she did a panel interview. She met with individual people on the team more than twice. She was getting regular emails. I believe that this was the example where she was getting smiley faces in those emails. That is extremely misleading if at the end of the process there was no intention on bringing Hannah on. Super misleading. Leave the smiley faces out unless there's a very good reason to use them. And that is that you're going to hire this person. And Hannah said that she had a great feeling, that she really felt like she was getting this job. And it's been over 5 weeks since the final interview, and she's followed up weekly, which I think that's a great best practice. If you're not hearing back, keep following up. Even if you are hearing back, just keep following up. You should absolutely continue to be a name that these people see in your email. And this is just general feedback for everyone. No matter what, whether you're ghosted or not, keep sending those follow-up emails. But going back to my question for you, Hannah, if someone on the inside referred you for this job, not that you would even be interested at this point, but maybe you would be, considering it's been more than 6 months that you've been unemployed, can you ask them to follow up on your behalf? I will tell you very candidly that although I'm not on the recruiting side of the fence in any of the companies that I've worked for, I have had more than 5 experiences that I can think of like immediately where someone was referred, and for whatever internal reasons, the process was a little slow, whether it was because of reorgs or just like, busy times of the year. And maybe it was like a week or so since someone had heard back. And the person that referred that candidate would ping me and the recruiting team, but generally it would ping me because I tend to be in more of a business partner capacity. And I tend to respond fairly quickly. And that would get the ball moving again. So if you haven't, and maybe even if you have, ask your person on the inside to follow up and find out what's going on, and maybe they can give some feedback too. Because actually, the biggest thing for me in this example is that you were a referral. You should be treated like every interviewee, every candidate should be treated the same way and with 1000% respect, right? But when someone is referred, I should say, and when someone is referred, because it doesn't negate all of those other things that I said, when someone's referred, they tend to get a little bit of extra special treatment. They get the VIP services, if you will. And it doesn't sound like you've been getting the VIP treatment. So I would definitely use your person on the inside to talk to these bozos. I'm bringing that back because these people are bozos. And I don't know, maybe it'll make a difference, and maybe you will hear back, and maybe it'll be great news, and maybe you'd consider working for them, or maybe it's just an opportunity to have some closure on that experience. The third role that Hannah referenced was a higher ed position where she was invited to apply. And actually, I think this was the second example. Yes, because the first example that I just recapped, I see it in my notes here. She was invited to apply for and was ghosted. That's insane. I've never heard of such a thing. And then this third example in the higher ed position, she was also invited to apply. And these are headhunters or, professionals who seek out and source talent for these roles. And it tends to be in a private capacity either before a role is posted or when a role is posted in order to find the best talent as quickly as possible. And Hannah said that she was meeting these people in person. She met around 8 to 10 people and then nothing. And then the fourth example, consulting agency, there was a quick turnaround with the interview process, but then there was ultimately no response. What is going on? Like, wellness check on these interviewers and these recruiters. Either everybody recruiting and like doing this ghosting needs to be fired, sorry but not sorry, or they really just need to fundamentally think about how they treat people. I can't help but think that there has to be some correlation to all of the layoffs that happened in talent acquisition over the last couple of years and the lack of professionalism that Hannah specifically has experienced here. Like, is there a shortness of staff in these companies? Are they like demoralized because maybe the team is smaller? Because to remind you, there were a ton of layoffs even this time last year in talent acquisition specifically, which made no sense because there are always jobs. And as we see, even when people are going through layoffs, like major companies go through layoffs and they still have jobs to fill. So that's all I can say. Hannah, I wish that I had better advice for you, but it sounds like you're doing all of the right things. It sounds like you've done everything that you could possibly do to get the outcome that you want. And I hear what you're saying. You've been laid off 3 times in the last 6 years, and that you've never been unemployed for more than 3 months, which is amazing. It's certainly not the norm. Many people, especially in 2024, in recent layoffs, have experienced, not recent layoffs, but in the last year, let's say, have been unemployed, I should say, for up to a year, sometimes more. I just recently read that statistic and I cannot remember where I read that, but I will see if I can find it for the show notes. So that is not to inflate your sense of safety and stability, because I know that probably isn't even possible considering you're actively trying to find work, and you don't feel that sense of comfort because of all of these experiences that you've outlined for us. But I do think, that 3-month turnaround for finding a job is probably like your pie in the sky. Like, that's an amazing achievement. And being unemployed for 6 months is probably more typical, especially unfortunately, in HR, in an industry that sometimes, or in a profession sometimes, that tends to be cut first. Not always, right? Like, we see HR obviously being sometimes on the delivering ends of these messages, but when businesses look to trim areas of their organization, sometimes these internal departments tend to be cut. So it can be very challenging, especially L&D. Also, L&D and talent acquisition. I don't really get it because, when you don't have active development of your organization, there's going to be a slowing of progress. But anyway, I'm kind of like diverting from the subject matter here, but all of this to say, your recommendations are great. You said two things. You kind of like cut yourself off at the knees because you thought that these jobs were going to work out, so you stopped applying, and you said to yourself, and you said to the listeners, don't do that. Keep applying. Put yourself first. Just because something feels like it's going in the right direction doesn't mean that it's going to 100% land. Like, just keep going. Fully agree with that. And the second was that looking for part-time work is a great next step in the event that someone does experience unemployment. And you shared also, some personal examples of Massachusetts unemployment and where unemployment services tend to fall a bit short. And that is, I was shocked to hear less than a third, and that I know that there are income caps, but the earning on your income being limited, it's so tough, right? Because we want people to work. Like, we want people to get the unemployment that they need in order to sustain their lives. We also want them to be able to go out and work. So it kind of feels like a contradictory message. It's like, here's unemployment to keep you on your feet, and a check to keep you on your feet, but also don't make too much because otherwise the check's going to stop. So, work a little bit. Like, that doesn't really help anybody. I don't know. Maybe I'm recording this before 6 a.m, so maybe you're catching me at a bit of a sassy time. I don't know, but like, it just something here, like with the ghosting, this is a trend that just does not make sense to me. What I will say, also coming back to this being unemployed for 6 months and you don't want it to look like you have this big gap on your resume. This might be where I offer some advice that either you maybe have considered or haven't. And I would say, worry less about that. Find the right thing. I think looking for consulting work, looking for part-time work, looking for, anything that's freelance, contract work, anything like that is a good idea. It's going to keep your knives sharp, your skills sharp, and it's going to keep you in the actively searching pool, right? Like, the more people you meet through the processes, like the more work that you do, especially on the contracting side, the more connections you're going to make if you look at things like that. And I would say on your resume, I mean, it's the middle to end of November that I'm recording this. It's actually basically the week leading up to when this episode's coming out. If you think about it, I shared in the layoff series recently that a lot of layoffs tend to happen around this time. It's like, many organizations are in their fiscal year Q4 and the calendar year Q4, but they're in their Q4. They don't have a ton of time to inflate sales or inflate revenue. And so in order to have an appearance of a stronger business or stronger business results, they cut and they do layoffs in order to have this, I don't want to say appearance, but really put on this presentation that the business results are maybe a little bit stronger than they are. This is the way that I see layoffs happening in Q4 personally. And so one thing that works in your benefit here is that if you do have a gap, let's say you don't find anything through between now and the rest of the year, highly possible, right? Because to your point, there aren't a ton of jobs because people are going through layoffs. Companies are trying to kind of, tighten the belt and batten down the hatches and keep costs low through the rest of the year. You can say, on your resume, it's fine to show a gap. A recruiter's going to ask you, or, a hiring manager is going to ask you what happened with your last job. You have a gap in your resume. They might ask. Not everyone asks about gaps because 6 months is not even that much time. Personally, I don't think. you can say, listen, I was unfortunately laid off. I applied for a ton of positions and I was invited to interviews and I had some great luck, but I didn't really find what I was looking for. And so I decided to take some time to reflect on what it is that I'm looking for in a role, what it is that I'm looking for in a culture and an organization. And so I kind of took the end of the year off. I kept my skills sharp. I did all of these things. I volunteered. I worked as a contractor. I did freelance, whatever it is that you end up doing with the rest of your, let's say, the next 6 weeks through the rest of the year. I think that's a really good story or example of how you potentially frame your gap in your experiences. If I were interviewing you and I asked you that question and you responded to me with that, I think it would make perfect sense to me. That someone, you could even reason with them and say, listen, I don't know about so and so company or whatever company you apply for. I don't know about so and so company, but there weren't a ton of jobs posted at the end of the year, and I took the opportunity to just take the time to reset, reflect on what I need, make sure my resume was sharp, and specifically fine tune where I was applying. So, with that, my second piece of advice is potentially to apply a little bit less and more selectively. I used to, like, when I was like in between, not in between jobs, because I always like went from one to the next. But when I was like in between experiences where I was like at a company looking for something else and then applying and then eventually going to that other company, in the beginning of my career, I LinkedIn easy applied to everything. I was like, oh yeah, click, 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 submit, submit, submit. I applied to everything. And it didn't really serve me well. I would say that knowing you're probably like tracking where you applied. You're probably like, finding out who's hiring for the position. Like where does the position sit in the company? Like you're probably very detailed and thoughtful about your applications. However, I will say maybe something to do either through the next 6 weeks or even at the start of the new year, if you do try to take some time to just focus on like a contracted role or part-time role while you're looking for something full-time, is to really be very, very specific about where you apply and focus your energy on connecting with people at that organization, finding more people on the inside who can refer you for roles, and doing your best to be as tailored as possible. I know it might sound counterintuitive because, statistically, you'd think the more places you apply for, the more interviews you get. Not necessarily. I think where we put our energy is where we tend to get something back, like a return on that investment. And certainly you might have done that with 50 jobs. You might have said, I like all of these 50 jobs. This is a specific application for me, putting a lot of effort into it. And that's totally fine. If that's the case for you, then you keep doing what you're doing. If you were kind of just like clicking and applying for everything because you're like, holy crap, I need a job, I would reset your approach, try taking a different approach, specifically applying for these very individualized jobs that are specific to what you really want to do, and then spending whatever extra time you might have from not applying to a bunch of jobs to really specifically reach out to the right people, trying to get connected. You're never going to waste time by building relationships with people, by connecting, by networking, however you want to frame it. You'll never waste time. If you're spending an hour every day on LinkedIn trying to form a connection or a community within your industry or within a particular subset of industry, you're never wasting your time, because you really honestly never know who you could end up working for, who you could end up working with, who you might have a great interaction with, who's like, you know what, we should give this person a shot. Like, they reached out, they're very proactive. Let's see how it goes. So I think those are probably the two pieces of advice that I have for you. And hopefully for the listeners, they are walking away, maybe even reflecting on their own experiences if they too are in a position where they're actively searching for a role. And I think I've said it before on the podcast, and this is probably my final point. I always say that, and then it's never my final point, but nevertheless, is that resume gaps are way more normal now since COVID than ever before. I like when I work with resume clients who have resume gaps or gaps in their resume, I should say, I'm never concerned about it. Either if it's like more than a year, we like put pen to paper and we call it something. Either it's a personal time away or it's, a career gap for reflection on the future of your career, whatever it is, like taking care of family, being a caregiver, whatever it is. Like after a year, yeah, we probably should put some context there. But from the clients that I've worked with who have gaps in their resume, I have not yet heard that it's been an issue for them in the interview process. I think that just generally people get it more now than before. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Lean into it. And maybe you do consider taking the rest of the year to just kind of like cleanse yourself of these negative experiences, because it's a lot. You've shared with me 4 very real experiences where you have put in a ton of time and effort, and time is money. It doesn't matter that you're unemployed and you quote unquote have the time to interview. I do not care. We are not in the business of wasting people's time. This is not okay. So you might need to like do a cleanse. You might need to do an interview, job search cleanse. If you can, I know like from a financial standpoint that, requires a lot of, flexibility on your husband's part too. I guess it really depends on your financial situation, but do whatever you can to find some part-time work, find a contract role. But otherwise, I would definitely cleanse myself, if I were you, of the interview process, of the job search. Maybe take a few weeks to just not apply to anything. Have someone take a look at your resume. I'm happy to take a look at it, by the way. If you want just second eyes, you probably have already done that knowing you. And start off fresh in the new year, where there hopefully will be a lot of jobs posted. Because again, I think Q4, companies are trying to make their end of year results and their full year to date results look as best as possible. And so we see unfortunately, a lot of layoffs at this time. But generally, I think in Q1, we also see a lift in job openings. So we shall see. Keep me posted, and hopefully this has helped you in some way. And for the listeners who can relate, or maybe someone who can benefit from this, please, feel free to share this episode, like it, review it, give me a rating, share your thoughts with me in a DM on Instagram, or send me an email at contact@hrtraci.com. I really appreciate all of the feedback always over the years. And Hannah, best of luck to you. I will be in touch. Of course, I'm probably going to text you right after this since it's more of a reasonable hour now. And everyone, thank you so much. Just to kind of look ahead for a couple weeks, we have a guest episode next week. And then the episode after that is actually the last episode of 2024. I'm taking a few, I think let me think, 3 or 4 weeks off. So the last episode will be in 2 weeks. And the first episode of 2025 will be January 7th, I think it is. So not that first week, but the second week. So lots to look forward to. And again, Hannah, best of luck. And to all of those listeners out there who maybe are in the same situation, keep your heads up. It will all work out. I know it's easy for me to say on this side of the fence, but just trust me on this. It will all work out. I know it. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.